Hello, techies. Welcome to the Tech Ties Africa podcast, where we'll bring you the latest stories on tech and startups in Africa. Catch us every Thursday at 10 a.m. WAT on techtiesafrica.podbean.com. Let us know what you think by giving us feedback in the comments or on our socials. Now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to the Tech Ties Africa podcast. We have a couple of topics that, as always, we would be going through. There are a number of developments in Africa that some of them I'm really excited about because there are things we have talked about previously on the podcast and seeing some further development. So, Karen, how are you doing?
Hi, Kelvin. I'm doing great. I'm really excited about today's topic. First of all, there's something on renewable energy, and you guys know I am very into that. We also have some Nigerian companies doing too much as usual.
Always.
We shall So I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, let's get started. Tesla is opening an office in Casablanca with the plans to sell cars, solar, and electricity. This is quite interesting because it's an actual physical space. They are going to have an office here. They are going to do sales and then after sales for different products offerings. Of course, we know how popular Tesla is in the electric vehicle space. Occasionally, we have talked about some EV developments. And so it's quite exciting to see the biggest EV company, I think you can safely say, coming to Africa.
Yeah, I think electric vehicles are becoming a lot more serious than most of us thought they would be, myself included. I've just started seeing in my area, for example, a lot of electric motorcycles coming up, and a lot of our boda boda or okada operators are moving to that space because it's saving them money as well. And I believe that that is the first step towards all kinds of motor vehicles becoming electric. And this is a really cool thing. I'm seeing that they're not just doing the vehicles, they're also doing solar panels. They're setting up charging stations, which is something we talked about a couple of weeks ago. We saw it starting to happen in Nigeria. We've seen that it's been happening in Kenya. The government has gotten into that. And so that tells us this is a trend, and we can expect that in the next few years, it will become something quite big in Africa. Now, Tesla creating this in Morocco means we'll see a change in the energy and transport sectors, right? Starting with Morocco and then probably trickling down to other countries in North Africa. And eventually, we will start to see that trickle to other countries within the continent. We've seen Nigeria hoping to create and build a manufacturing space for electric vehicles. So this is becoming a major trend in the African continent. I know we've seen a lot of it in the West, especially in the US, but now we're seeing it coming into Africa. And I think if you are an entrepreneur, and I've said this before, in this space, you need to start thinking about complementary services, platforms, tools, products that complement the presence of this electric vehicle manufacturing spaces. How can you complement that? Because that's going to become a business need very soon as this trend grows. So that's something to think about. I'm really excited about it. I think I'm seeing Elon Musk is becoming very interested in the African continent, just my thinking, and waiting to see how this goes and if we're going to see another office opened somewhere else in Africa. I think it will, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, on Elon Musk, I think some of the reasons why he's becoming interested in Africa is part of it should do with his recent fallout with Donald Trump because of a bill that Donald Trump is trying to pass that would take away the subsidies that his companies were benefiting from. One of the attractions with Morocco is they are quite welcoming for EV companies and their taxation is also quite low. So there is some attraction in that regard. And it's also a strategic location being in North Africa. Of course, it's close to the Middle East while also being in Africa. So as much as it's an interesting development, I think it's also strategic from Elon Musk and Tesla. Of course, we have seen Starlink has been trying to get into every African country in recent times. I know over the last week they got into three other countries in Africa, and they will continue expanding. Elon Musk is finally remembering. It seems that he's from Africa, and
Our South African brother.
I yeah. He has finally remembered Africa and beginning to build the infrastructure that Africa needs. And I think it's a good thing. The thing with big companies is when they come into a country, they force other bigger companies to look in that direction as well. So I believe we'll see other players in the space also start to look at Africa as a destination. And that comes with funding, that comes with infrastructure, and that should hopefully help the growing EV space. So I look forward to more of these developments. Like you, I was on the fence about electrical vehicles, but the more I read about these things, the more I learn about them, I start to see, okay, there are possible applications. There is a way that this works, especially with charging stations and all of these companies. I mean, one of the companies we'll talk about, Move, does vehicle financing as well. I can start to see like how the ecosystem will build, and that has now gotten me. I'm very interested in EVs. So
I agree with what you said about strategy because Morocco is also one of the countries with the highest rates of solar adoption in the continent. And I think in the world, I'm not sure about the second part, but in the continent, it has the highest level of solar adoption. And it also opens the market to Europe, to Africa. So it's a very strategic location. So we're moving on to Move, which is a Nigerian startup that is Uber backed, and it is currently seeking unicorn status. It's about to get there because it is raising $300 million in a fresh round of funding, and this is going to take its valuation up to 1 billion shillings, which shows us its move towards the unicorn status. And we've seen a few unicorn companies coming out of Nigeria, which is why I'm constantly saying Nigeria is doing too much. Now, as I was reading through Move, I was really shocked at the kinds of moves, no pun intended, that the company has been making. I mean, these guys have purchased a Brazilian company. They have signed a deal with Alphabet where they're giving some services to their self-drive taxis. And I think that is a great example of what we have been saying for founders to think about services that they can offer around the electric vehicle movement that is happening in Africa right now. So really excited. I'm just thinking the kinds of strategic moves it's making are really interesting. And I am excited to see what happens next once they have finished this round of funding.
yeah, if you've paid attention to Move, you realize they are always on the move, pun intended. It's quite interesting how they are able to pull all of this off. And one thing they seem to be doing, I think we talked about last week, is building like the infrastructure for some of these technologies that are coming up. So if you're not directly building the technology, you might as well build the infrastructure that that technology will need to run. So you kind of do all of that. Financing for Uber drivers, they do financing for electronic vehicles, they are working with Alphabet. They are working with all of these big companies. They are making acquisitions around the world. This doesn't feel like a small startup. It's not at that level again. And I can only hope that they continue to pave the way forward. And yeah, wishing them all the best.
Absolutely. And one thing you've said about them being a fintech, I think it's also really interesting to see that if you're a fintech that is solving a problem for a niche market and you are able to focus on that and create really good built-in repayment mechanisms to ensure that you don't have a large number of non-performing assets where you don't have loans that are not being paid, then it will work, because they are very niche in who they target, right? So things like agri-financing, logistics credit, fleet financing, spaces that are very niche but necessary in the African context. If you create a product from the fintech perspective that is geared towards these people and you build the right repayment strategies and mechanisms, then it is possible that you can make really cool moves in the African continent. Just something to add as we finish on that topic.
Definitely. So the US startup Wave has received authorization to operate in Cameroon through a partnership with the Commercial Bank Cameroon, CBC. This approval comes from their Central African Banking Commission, and it would allow Wave to operate in Cameroon moving forward. And I think this is just part of a trend we are beginning to see on the podcast. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about another global company getting into Cameroon. I can't remember at the top of my head now, but we are seeing more and more that there is a growing interest in Francophone Africa, and Cameroon seems like the destination if you're trying to get into that part of the world. I mean, it's always interesting to see some developments in other African countries that are not part of the big four, like we have seen with Zambia in recent times. And a couple of times now, Cameroon has popped up on the radar. So it looks like one to pay attention to when you're thinking about Francophone Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing this is because Francophone Africa is really low in terms of penetration of digital payment systems. And when you're coming from the perspective of maybe Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, you're so used to digital payments, but you sometimes fail to understand that there are some countries where this penetration is not as high as it is in some of the countries in Africa. There's a lot of disparity, right? So I think that's why we're seeing a lot more people going in there, because there's actually a need for this digital payment solutions and remittance solutions. I'm looking forward to see how these new companies will navigate compliance, because I also don't know how well regulated finance is in Cameroon, and perhaps that's something for research. So just to see how they will navigate that, and how, as more digital payment solutions come into the country, how regulations will change and the kinds of opportunities that will come in for cross-border payments. I know that a lot of countries, I know Kenya, for example, is very interested in doing more trade, more business with Cameroon. And so seeing how these will change cross-border payments and ease trade between Cameroon and other countries, and between Francophone Africa in general with other countries, how that will be changed by the digital systems that are coming in right now.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point there with Cameroon. It's definitely not a region that has some of the penetration that the big four have. I mean, when you're trying to innovate in that space, especially now, it gives you the first mover advantage. And I think that's some of what is an attraction into that space. There's a lot of markets to capture. It's still early days. So now is the time to make the move as we continue to see the digital growth that is happening in Africa. So, yeah.
100%. And onto a story that we have discussed for the last 2 weeks, employee shares. So M-KOPA is being accused of racial discrimination when it comes to share structure. There's a former employee, a lady, who has taken them to court. Her name is Elizabeth Njoki. She used to work there from 2012 to 2023, and she has filed a petition with the Employment and Labor Relations Court, accusing the company of systematically disadvantaging African staff while favoring white employees. The story is quite interesting because apparently, according to the petition, M-KOPA restructured its employee share ownership in 2019 and introduced something called growth shares with some benefits, including the ability to buy back rights, preferential pricing at $1 per share, access to company information, and guaranteed exits at a fair market value. Of the first 48 recipients, only 7 were African. And then another round of restructuring excluded Kenyan employees completely. So African staff were reclassified as minor holders and were denied voting rights or access to shareholder meetings, and their ordinary shares were diluted from 27% to 7% without their consent. Now, this is really interesting because, first of all, I'm really happy to see African people start to understand their rights and start to fight for their rights, because SOPs need to be fair when they are given. Obviously, over the last couple of weeks, we have been talking about MoneyPoint, I believe, and the SOP that it had and how good it was for its employees. And here we're seeing another startup with SOPs that seem to be discriminatory in nature. Now, obviously, we have to wait for court rulings to say whether it was discriminatory or not. But the case alleges that there is inferior stock packages given to African descent, which I think is something that is very common in the world where minorities seem to be left out or discriminated against. I want to hear your thoughts.
So something that I think I just noticed as you were talking about this topic was the fact that a lot of these court cases that we have seen or legal proceedings in recent times have been from Kenya. And I'm quite intrigued by that because it means there's something with Kenyan legal system that does encourage the employee to speak up. And I know you have talked about how the court favors the employees in certain cases like this. But the more we continue to see these legal cases, the more that begins to be glaring because for me, sitting in Nigeria, thinking about going to court with things like this, it's not really the first thing I would think about, if I'm being honest, just because it can be a very tricky thing to do in Nigeria. But it's good to see that Kenya does allow the employee to speak up. In this case, this is an employee that has been at M-KOPA for over 10 years, 2012 to 2023. So she was at the company for a long period of time. And when someone has given you all of that time and they have helped in their own way to build the company to what it is, you expect some compensation, especially if you have been given shares and stocks and things like that. And in this case, just like the Money Point case we talked about last week, this employee and a couple of other employees have been denied their rightful shares. Beyond that, we can't really comment much on it because it's still an ongoing proceeding. But in the meantime, M-KOPA is also another very big startup that is operating multiple countries, same with MoneyPoint. So we are seeing a couple of these bigger startups in Africa going through some negative press. But I would wait until after the verdict is given. I guess then we can revisit this topic and talk a bit more about it. Moving forward, South African AI energy startup called Open Access Energy have secured some funding, $1.8 million, to enable digital infrastructure for electricity trading. So basically, they have this cloud based software that allows users to do energy wheeling, which is a process of delivering electricity from decentralized renewable producers to distributed customers via existing transmission infrastructure. They have raised some funding in this regard. They want to somehow sprinkle some AI on it. I'm not sure how they would go about this. But then, I mean, we are currently in the AI revolution. So everybody is building something with AI and they are trying to use AI to, I guess, do things like they improve their processes, like with metering, with risk management and forecasting, ensuring that the energy generation and consumption are efficiently matched. So this is not really an area that I would say I'm very knowledgeable about. I think maybe Karen, you would be more familiar with what they are trying to solve. But yeah, the fact that they have raised all of that money in funding is an indicator that there is opportunity in the space they're operating into. More power to them, I would say.
Yeah, actually, I read it and I was kind of excited, to be honest with you. I think this is a very, in my opinion, a very timely startup. And I think that they are solving a real problem. And I'll tell you why. Now, for many years, electricity generation has been left to really large corporations. And a lot of times they're corporations that are owned by the government. But with the starting of renewable energy, things like solar energy, windmills, we're seeing a lot more independent power plants coming up. And they may not be producing as much electricity as the bigger corporations. But I think in the future, we might see them overtake the large corporations, in my opinion, because we will find that a lot more people will start generating electricity for themselves. So you'll have your small house and you have a solar panel and you're generating your own energy. Perhaps you have some extra energy and you're selling it to your neighbors and stuff like that, or to an independent power plant. So with that, one of the biggest issues is, how do I run my meters? How do I focus how much energy is being consumed so that I know how much I need to produce? How do I know, for example, I want to increase or expand my power plant? How many solar panels do I need? How many more megawatts do I need? And how many people am I able to target so that I can reach a certain maybe financial space? So all this would probably be useful. And I think that is what open access energy is trying to do, which is really exciting because, for example, in Kenya, we are about to see a lot more independent power producing spaces coming up because we have a law that is about to be passed that will allow for people to register themselves as independent power plants. So we will see a lot more coming up with things like solar, where you just have a power plant that's producing maybe 20 megawatts, 40 megawatts. One of the biggest questions that you ask yourself as a founder in that space is, do I want to distribute the energy myself? Do I want to sell it back to the grid? If you do decide to do it yourself, then this is probably a really good product to have. So I'm really excited about it. I think it's a great idea. The fact that they're getting funding tells us that there is demand in this space. There is investor trust in this space. It signals that impact and intelligence, which is what I think they have, is going to attract capital. Obviously, I am also trying to see exactly how AI is coming in. I think the predicting is where AI will come in probably. I'm looking forward to seeing how they will do. And I think it's a very smart product that is definitely needed as more and more independent small power plants come up.
Yeah, when you explain it like that, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's something that we would also need in a country like Nigeria as well, because we know about the poor power supply in Nigeria. So definitely having some independent power plants that can also give back to the grid or sell directly by themselves to consumers would be very interesting. So yeah, now I think I would pay more attention to this.
Absolutely. Back to Nigeria. The federal government has signed an MOU with a Chinese tech company to explore direct to device satellite connectivity that will bypass ground infrastructure. So, this technology will allow smartphones to connect directly to satellites, especially in the rural spaces and places that are very hard to reach. One of the things I'm realizing is Nigeria is making some very smart moves from where I see it and based on the things that we have been talking about when it comes to technology, because we've seen them sign an MOU for manufacturing. Now we're seeing them sign an MOU for better connectivity that I think will solve rural connectivity challenges and also reduce infrastructural costs that are needed. This will take your connectivity, it will jump you forward so far as compared to if you had to wait to build the infrastructure for things like fiber, which is just so expensive. So I definitely think this is a really good move by your government. And I feel like they have been making a few really good moves, at least when it comes to the tech side of things.
Yeah, in the tech side of things, there seems to be somebody that knows what they are doing. And in the past week, we saw that Bosun Tijani, the Minister of Communications and Digital Technology, was elected the Vice Chair of the International Telecom Union. Nigeria is making a number of moves in technology, especially, and this is one of them. This is one that I find very intriguing, the fact that smartphones can connect directly to satellites, and that just takes the connectivity to a whole new level. And that I am quite intrigued by. And I also saw that Elon Musk has also hinted at doing this with Starlink, direct to cell services in countries where it operates, including Nigeria. And that now starts to kind of give me an idea of what their partnership that they did with Airtel a while ago could look like. So it could be something where through the Airtel SIM card gives you access to the Starlink satellites, and that just increases their product offerings. So just like that, you're an Airtel subscriber, you could now have this access to Starlink internet, and now you would not need their dish, and there are toolkits that you need to set up. You can just directly connect with your phone. That helps for better mobile internet, and there'll still be use cases for having their full kits for especially businesses and small and medium-sized businesses and things like that. But yeah, I'm quite intrigued now with satellite technology. So yeah, kudos to whoever is making all of these moves in Nigeria. And we, the consumers, will reap the benefits. And of course, the moment you have more of this technology, it leads to more development. And we would see some interesting startups build stuff around this technology. So rounding off, Visa and Yellow Card, they have entered a partnership that would allow businesses to send and receive stable coins. And Yellow Card is a company that has been operating in Africa, and I think they also operate in a few countries outside Africa. I'm not too sure, but mainly operate in Africa. They allow cryptocurrency trading in summary, and they have entered this partnership with Visa to bring cross-border stablecoin payments to countries in Central and Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa. One thing I noted about this story is that the stablecoin growth and acceptance is increasing more and more. A while ago on the podcast, we talked about MasterCard entering a partnership with one African startup. And it was also a similar partnership where they wanted to allow the sending of stable coins. And now we are seeing Visa, the other big global payment giants, entering a partnership with Yellow Card. So stablecoins look more and more attractive. More businesses are thinking about ways they can integrate stablecoins into their business. Shopify has introduced stablecoin payments with Seco. Walmart and Amazon are thinking about how they'll create their own platform stablecoins. And even Nigeria, we have talked about Nigeria on the podcast, introducing the CNGN stablecoin. And reportedly, there is about 165 million naira of that in circulation on cryptocurrency platforms. So there is a growing interest in stable coins. Of course, that makes it easier to do cross-border payments once the adoption is high enough as it continues to grow, solve some of the cross-border payment issues. And yeah, I like these developments.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to this. I think you have said it really well. For those of us who have always been skeptical and thought that, crypto is a fad and a scam, we're now starting to see it being confirmed by really large corporations, and it's becoming a common thing in the finance world. So I think as a founder, as a freelancer, as a tech person, maybe who works freelance, this creates a lot of opportunity for you in terms of investments, receiving money. Definitely something to start paying attention to. I know I have to. I keep saying that, and I'll start taking it seriously, just to understand how it works, how you can benefit from it. I think everything starts from a place of knowledge, and we're starting to see it become a real player in the finance space.
Yeah, definitely something to pay attention to. I think part of the attraction is the stability of stable coins, as the name implies. But yeah, we would pay attention to this, and I believe we'll see more of this trend as the year continues. And with that, we have come to the end of this episode. Do share and leave a comment, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Tech Tides Africa podcast. Remember, leave a comment or share with your friends. We'll see you next Thursday at the same time and place you get your podcast. Until then, stay well.